إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أما بعد. My dear brothers, we start in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Him to send His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you on this Jum'ah, keep you safe and your family safe in these times. Dear brothers and sisters, we live in a time where unfortunately the Muslim world is in a state of trouble, and in some parts of the world chaos, and in some parts of the world Muslims are being oppressed. And you know, the question often comes up to us living here, well, and I've gotten this question anytime I go and speak at any event, you know, with an interfaith event or a church or a university or something like that, someone will always ask a question. We encourage them to ask questions. They say, well, why are Muslims so violent? Why are Muslims in different parts of the world, why are they so violent? Why do we see that in so many parts of the Muslim world, these things that are taking place, terrorism and such? And oftentimes the answer is just very simple. And I'm sure that many of you have faced this question. If you have honest conversations with people at your work or friends and such, they'll ask you the same question. And often the simple answer is, well, Islam is a religion of peace, and those people that do those acts, they don't represent us, and though they're not representative of what Islam stands for. Yes, of course, that is true. But it's important that when we explain these matters to people, that we understand some context and some history. And so I want to talk a little bit about context and history today, and how we arrived to where we are today. And inshallah, I'll try to do that in a very succinct way because our time is always tight. You know, and we live in a time where we see two extremes. We see Muslims in various parts of the world who have engaged in terrorist acts and other things, and then you see on the other hand Muslims who have compromised their deen by engaging. For example, you see the Emirates, United Arab Emirates, engaging with Israel and freely trading and freely celebrating their new relationship and all of these things. So you see people on two different ends of this continuum. But the reaction that you see in the Emirates is a response, because as if they're trying to appease the world and say, no, Muslims, we are not bad, and look, we can collaborate and we can have relationships with anybody. They take it to another extreme. So let's look a little bit at history and see why we are at the point we are today, but I want to do it through a certain lens, and that is exploring the difference between how when Muslims went into different parts of the world and they conquered different lands very early on, from the time of Sayyidina Umar and on. And the difference between Islamic conquest and Western colonization. Islamic conquest and Western colonization. And the reason why I want to share this topic is because if you understand this topic and you understand it well, you will be able to very convincingly talk to people when they present those questions about, well, why are Muslims violent, and these sort of questions that people have based on what they see today. So we're talking about the difference between al-Fath al-Islami wal-Isti'mar al-Gharbi, right? The difference between Islamic conquest and Western colonization. And so what you find is two very stark, different, contrasting realities. Al-Fath al-Islami, Islamic conquest over the course of history, was about building civilization, was about giving value to the lands that they went, was about growth and development of the people's lands that they entered, and was about social change and justice. When you look at Western colonization, you see the exact opposite. You see it was about destruction and exploitation, underdevelopment, and leaving the people that they conquered poor, poverty. You find colonization, Western colonization, after the troops leave, after the conquest, what happens? Well, that's when there's more tricks and games and puppet regimes are put in, and that's what we find ourselves today, the Muslim world. We live in a post-colonial time where in all of the, in a majority of the Middle East, in Asia, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, in all of Africa, colonization ended only about 50, 60, 70 years ago. And so now the effects of colonization are still widely felt on the people, where the colonizer still has his hand on the natural resources and the people in the lands that they conquered. Whereas in Islam, when Muslims conquer different lands, what happened? After the troops are gone, Islam remains. Society flourishes. People become empowered with their Islam, and we see this all the way from to eastern Turkestan, where our brothers, our Uyghur brothers and sisters today are suffering. May Allah free them from their oppression, and all the way to the west, Western Africa and Islamic Spain, and up to the north and the south. Wherever Muslims went, when they left, when the troops left, civilization flourished. And it flourished, and if you look at places like Spain, it flourished. Sometimes that came to an end. Why? Because it was at the hands of the colonizer, who brought what he brought, never allowed Islam to stay in a peaceful manner. And that resulted in either people being forced to migrate, to leave, or being killed if they refused to convert, or a forced conversion. And so want to look at some of these very particular factors, and when you understand this, and a lot of these things you know, but I'm putting them together in one basket where you can easily understand and inshallah benefit from this, this historical legacy that we have. So the differences, number one of the main differences that we see between Islamic conquest and Western colonization, because in one sense they're a shared reality. It's a people who go into another land and take over that land. That is what's shared between when Europe, when they went to different parts of the world and they colonized different places, when just the same as when Muslims, they went to different parts of the world and they conquered different places. But the result is two completely, vastly different realities. So when we look at Western colonization, we see a pattern of annihilation and extermination and genocide sometimes of whole nations. We look at, for example, what the Portuguese and many other European nations, they engaged in Africa, where they took free people and enslaved them, captured them, took them on what is called the transatlantic slave trade, and established and built new colonies based upon the backs of these black African slaves. And it's estimated that up to 60 million people were killed in that process over the course of 500 years. And those killings still today. And what I'm talking about is in the remnants of police brutality and all of these other things that we see still, the oppression that the black community today faces in America. Then we look at the original inhabitants of this land, who were colonized by the British settlers and the French settlers and others who came to this land. And what did they do? They wiped out the vast majority of the natives of this country. At least 12 million people were killed. The native, and probably many more, the Native Americans today are the people who suffer from the worst levels of poverty, the worst levels of alcoholism and drug abuse, and so on and so forth. This is the shambles that these people were left in by the Western colonizer. You look at what the French, they did to the Algerians in the course of 100 years over the 18th and 19th century, where up to 5 million people were killed. You look at what the British did to the Aborigines of Australia. It's said that hundreds of thousands were killed, and they have documented 250,000 massacres, meaning mass slayings of people in a matter of a day or days that are documented about the people in that land. You look at what the Spanish did to the natives of Central and South America. They destroyed and exterminated entire civilizations, the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Incas. In a period of 100 years, over 50 million people are wiped out from violence and disease. Over 90% of the population is wiped out. This is the legacy of Western colonization. On the other hand, you look at when Muslims went into different lands and they opened up those lands. By the way, the word in our literature, and that is the Quranic terminology also. Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. This word fath, when the Prophet ﷺ went to Mecca, it was called Fath Mecca. They opened it up, right? It's a conquest, but the road is opened up. For what? For people to be free. For people to learn about who God is, for people to learn about a better way of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'izati al hasana." Call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good preaching. This is the spirit in which Muslims went into new lands. They didn't go with the spirit of domination and we're going to exterminate the people in whose land and we go into. And the Islamic concept of la ikraha fi deen, there's no compulsion in religion. They never forced Islam on others. The concept of where the Prophet ﷺ is commanded by Allah, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ إِنِّي رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِلَيْكُمْ جَمِيعًا. Say, O people, I have been sent as a messenger to all of you. The Prophet ﷺ is sent as a messenger, as a mercy to all of mankind. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This is the spirit in which Islam, in which Muslims, when they went into other lands, this is the spirit. We don't find in our history extermination, eradication, annihilation of people. We don't find that. We find the opposite. And we'll talk a bit about that, inshallah. The second difference, very stark difference between Western colonization and Islamic opening of lands is that Western colonization was by and large based on racism. Was founded upon the concept of racism, that white is superior and black is inferior, or anybody dark is inferior. And even in this country, the founding fathers, right, that are so highly spoken of, they declared that black people in any given state, they would only be counted as 3/5, right? 3/5 of the number of white inhabitants of any given state. So in essence, by law they are seen as lesser of a people. And so what did that mean? That mean they justified war based upon racism, and that gave them license, the Western colonizer, to go pillage and plunder and enslave people. As for Islam, Islam eradicates racism from the beginning, from day one. Right, from the beginning, from day one. لا فضل لعربي على أعجمي. There is no virtue of an Arab over a non-Arab and a black over a white. This is or a white over a black. This is the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ from day one. So this was never an issue for Muslims when they went into lands. They didn't see people that way. They didn't look at people as inferior, as lesser than. Islam dealt with the evil from day one, never used it as a justification to conquer other people that we see was a stamp of how Europeans dealt with other darker people in different parts of the world. Another difference between the Western colonizer and the Islamic conqueror is that the economic conditions, we look at what the result, the legacy of conquest as it relates to Europeans versus Muslims. Two vastly different realities. Colonization leaves a legacy of poverty and of dependence. Everywhere it goes, it leaves the native people in a state of poverty and independence. In India and Egypt, throughout Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America. These are all places today that are considered to be third world countries or developing countries. Why? They weren't that way before. They were civilizations that were flourished in those different places. But why are they the way they are now? Because the European colonizer left them in that state. Have you ever heard of the term rice Christian? A rice Christian? A rice Christian, this is a term that was used by and large in Indonesia and other places. It was a term that meant that a convert to Christianity who accepts baptism, when the Christians go to a land, when the Europeans went to a land, they accept Christianity not on the basis of personal conviction, but so that they can live out of a desire for food. Why? Because the colonizer comes in and destroys the local civilization, the local economy. And Europe strips all of the lands that it goes into of their natural resources, and we see this time and time again. If you look at a place, this is very interesting, a place like Algeria in the 1800s, they used to export wheat to Europe, to France. Now, what happened? Well, Europe went in and colonized Algeria and stole all of their resources, and now they are left dependent. Right? So two different realities. On the other hand, Islam, what is the Islamic legacy of conquest when Muslims go into different lands? Lands that are conquered by Muslims, they bring prosperity and economic benefit to the local and native populations. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who's considered to be the fifth rightly guided Khalifa, he invites his regional governors to him, and he tells them, and he says, this is the spirit that the rulers, when Muslims went to different lands, this is the spirit they went in with. He says, look to the land that you have and give it for half of the price. Give it to the local people for half of what it's worth. If they can't afford it, give it to them for 1/3, and on until 1/10 of the price. If they can't afford it, give it to the local people for free. No land should be left uncultivated. This is the spirit of when Muslims went into different lands to bring prosperity to the people. Not only that, we find in the Dawla al-Abbasiyya, the Abbasid Empire, that they established a special administration. They called it Diwan ul-Ma, the Bureau of Water Management. Right? And they built canals and irrigation and waterways, and they drained swamps, and basically for what? For the purpose of benefiting the local people. Not so that they can irrigate that land and take it back to the capital city and strip the local people of their resources, but so they can change the landscape of the place into which they went. It was so big that they employed thousands of employees in this one bureau. And they would give farmers, local farmers, subsidies to encourage farming and such. And this is a vast difference in the economy that Muslims left when they went into different lands versus when the Western colonizer went in. Then we look at the issue of education. Western colonization, wherever they went, they intentionally kept people ignorant. They went into lands to strip them of the learning and knowledge and education that they had, and wherever they went, they closed schools. The British, when they left Egypt, they left the local population 90% illiterate. They say that women were 98% illiterate when they left, when the British left Egypt, and similar numbers in India. When the colonizers went into different places, they shut down universities. You look at a place like Timbuktu in Mali, in West Africa. They shut down the university. When the Mali people gained independence in about 1960, the French government made an agreement with them. They said, we will give you your independence, but you are not allowed to re-establish Timbuktu University, and no more teaching in the Arabic medium. They stripped this what used to be the lingua franca of the world, right? What used to be the commonly used language, just like English is everywhere in the world today. It used to be Arabic, but the colonizer went in to strip people of their education and their intellectual civilization. We look at al-futuhat al-Islamiyya. We look at when Islam went into different lands and brought prosperity to different places. What did they do as far as education is concerned? They established dozens of universities. They established hundreds of schools and thousands of educational institutes. The Kutab system is established where Quran is taught throughout the Muslim world, wherever it expanded to. This is the ummah of Iqra. This is the ummah that is founded upon knowledge. And they took that wherever they went. They empowered local populations with knowledge. And that's why when you look in different fields of science and of different Islamic sciences, the topmost scholars in many cases, in most cases, were people who were native to their particular lands. If you look at the top scholars in Hadith, al-Muhaddithun, al-Bukhari, al-Nasa'i, al-Tirmidhi, all of these people, they were not Arabs, they were people who learned because Muslims took knowledge wherever they went. When you look at medicine and you look at all of the different fields of biology and other sciences, you find names like Al-Khwarizmi in terms of algebra and math, and Al-Razi, Ibn Sina. All of these people, they were from the native lands where they went to. They received the education because the Muslims provided opportunity. And the last thing we just mentioned briefly, because time is short, is the difference in terms of the legacy that the Western colonizer left as far as health is concerned, and what Muslims they took into different lands when, as regards to the overall health of society. Colonization brought and left disease everywhere it went. And they brought disease. Smallpox destroyed entire populations. They left disease, they neglected the infrastructure of the local population of the colonized countries that they went to, and they let malaria and polio and typhoid and all of these things spread. Hepatitis C in Egypt is the highest rate of anywhere in the world, and that had to do with the legacy of the colonizer. You look, there's a book, it's called Al-Tabshir wal-Isti'mar. It's a very nice book. And they talk about how, the author, he talks about when European colonizers, when they would go into different lands, they would establish medical clinics. And what they would do, they would give the local population who would come in for them for medical treatment a pill. And it didn't have any medicinal value. The people remained sick, they would get worse because there was no treatment. They would give them that same pill that had no value. And then they would give them, but they had the cure. They would give them the cure when they told them, well, if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord, then we will give you the cure. And this is in many places the devious way in which they dealt with people and how they dealt with their health and wellness. And then we look at Muslims when they went into different lands and the legacy they left. They established hospitals everywhere they went. They had the most advanced medical treatment and medical practices of their time wherever they set foot. Muslims are the first to have established mobile clinics. They're the first to have established psychiatric wards to deal with mental health. They were pioneers in so many other facets of medicine. Wherever lands that they went to, they brought benefit to them for their people. And many other things, dear brothers and sisters, that we find many other differences. The colonizers, wherever they went, they enslaved. Muslims, wherever they went, they freed. Colonizers, wherever they went, they forced a religion upon people. Muslims, wherever they went, it was an open, and in fact, we find some of the Jews, some of their golden ages were under the shade of the Muslim empire. They allowed others to maintain their faith and to prosper in their faith. And then we find colonizers, wherever they went, they stole resources. They raped the local people of their resources. And Muslims, wherever they went, they provided resources and they increased the benefit of the people and the lands where they went to. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ادعوا الله وأنتم موقنون بالإجابة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. Dear brothers and sisters, so the next time somebody asks you a question, say, right, why are Muslims why are they violent people? Why do they do these different things? Why do we see Muslims fighting in different parts of the world? Go beyond. Ask them, do you want to sit a minute? Do you want to know about history? Do you want to understand that these things did not happen in a vacuum? There is a backstory. And so it's very important as Muslims that we know our history and we're able to articulate it. And inshallah we hope that this was a benefit. اللهم إني داع فقولوا آمين. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وأقم الصلاة.